Hey, it's Andrew. Welcome to Tomo. It's Monday, November 28th. And there's a few things going on in the world I'd like to talk about. Going over to the Middle East, we have the area of Kurdistan, the northern area of Iraq, and kind of around that southern part of Turkey to that northeastern area part of Syria. I mentioned before in another video, there's large oil fields in that area, and you have the Kurdistan fighting forces there, and it was back, I think, even during the Obama era, where there was a lot of support that was given to the Kurds, and that created a lot of contention as well, because there's been friction between Kurdistan and Turkey and Syria and Iran, um, especially with some of the ISIS work that was going on there as well. So it was creating uh, a security situation on these borders that I think what we're seeing is kind of the security friction fatigue that's now setting in, and countries these countries being Turkey, Syria, and Iran, seeing that, well, now that USA is seemingly in decline. So I talked about setting up these geopolitical positions like pieces on a Go board, meaning Go, the old Chinese game where you set up these little tokens and you take board territory. And if you place a token down and it blocks an opponent's token, and that opponent's token has no friendly tokens beside it, then that token then flips over and becomes part of your territory. This is kind of what we're seeing here in back, especially during Desert Storm and all the time from then up until now, where the USA went into the Middle East and started with their military might, started to tokenize a lot of these things. And just as an offside or an aside on this, is the test of the US military equipment was done on these regional powers. And what we're finding is during the Ukraine conflict, a lot of these weapon systems aren't, especially in the early parts of the conflict, a lot of these export weapon systems weren't up to the caliber of even taking on old uh, ex Warsaw Pact equipment that you saw in Ukraine. So the equipment was for a different type of war, where the shock and awe, you can come in with an unfettered air force, complete supremacy, come in and basically soften up all the targets. So all you have to do is just mop up whatever's remaining. And it doesn't require high end equipment to do that once the back's broken of the enemy. But going back to our Middle East setup here in northern Iraq, so we have this configuration now, and it definitely sets up a kind of an energy situation. So you have the foreign ministry of Iraq condemning the recent attacks by Turkey. I think the Operation Peace Claw or something. I don't recall the operation off the top of my head. I mentioned it in a previous video, where Turkey was going to go in and start to do kind of anti-terrorism operations. Again, their language, not mine, in that area to kind of nullify some of the Kurdistan militants that are in that area. So the foreign ministry of Iraq, which we know is more connected with the US, is condemning the attacks by Turkey and Iran in their country. And they say that they don't want to have that. So this is what we're seeing is a decline in control for this part of the geopolitical chessboard. The USA is no longer projecting power into this area, and thus the Kurdistan group has a chance, did have a chance to kind of figure out, okay, well, who should we kind of cozy up to and get support from? Because the United States, as they diminish, I think it's kind of like pop their head up and realize that, okay, USA is no longer here. And thus the Syrian National Army is stated that it's going to join with any sort of Turkish offensive. So this is something, keeping an eyeball on this one, because I've seen other reports where there's some sort of fluctuation that's happening. So I don't quite know the underpinnings as to what the backdoor agreements are that are happening, because all games of diplomacy have backroom agreements. World geopolitical standpoint is no different. So the US State Department even went ahead and urged Syria, or the de-escalation in Syria, to protect civilian life and support the common goal of defeating ISIS. Okay, ISIS. During the Obama administration, we saw ISIS all the time in the news. I was reading on it constantly, 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 constantly. And you'd think that a global power like the United States could easily, if you want to get rid of ISIS, you just go in and just get rid of them. You know, there was a point where tables turned and Syria got support from Russia. I think Russia came in just in 2 weeks. You didn't hear about ISIS anymore. It was just gone. So, there's conjecture that ISIS is just a front for special operations work that's going on in the region. One conjecture, and I have to call it conjecture, I don't have receipts to pull on this. It's hard to get receipts for some of this type of stuff because we just don't know, again, those backroom deals that are going on. That if ISIS stays around and stays in play and is allowed to exploit oil fields in the north of Iraq, possibly in conjunction with the Kurdistan militants, then they could sell that oil. We get some finger wagging that happens in the media, but the sales, some of the proceeds of the sales goes to reinstate some of the black site work that's going on in that area, whether it's MI6 or CIA, who knows? Nobody sends me information about that. We just have to kind of discern it from the way that the game pieces are being played on the board. So if I want to kind of backstop maybe some clandestine work, then it could sell oil on the black market, and that be that. Now, with OPEC reducing production, that makes the unfettered access to oil in northern Iraq as something that might be a bit of a game to play. So as OPEC cuts production, commodity prices go up, and definitely black market work can ramp up. So we have to see how this is playing out. The President Erdogan in Turkey had a cabinet meeting today. Nothing came out of it. It's a very long cabinet meeting where potentially what was being discussed is maybe the military and geopolitical situation as to who can carve out which parts of that area, maybe some of the future aspirations of that area. And again, it's an energy rich area, and Europe is in a bit of a pickle for non-Russian energy sources. So you have a solution here right now in the Middle East. And that solution means that the people that are sitting on top of that solution, arms crossed, saying we ain't going to play, but have no power or stake in the game. Their little go chip on the board is quite fleeting with all these other pieces around. And Erdogan's a power player. He can play different color pieces on the board because it's just Turkey's geopolitical place in the world is at an energy crossroads right now. So we're going to see more of that coming forward as times move forward. So other things that are happening. So there's a lot of news articles about the protests happening in China, and this is actually quite a big one. The Chinese economy is really not doing well. They're very good at hiding this, so you might think, "Wow, China, they're good. They can ship all this stuff across the world. They're now taking Russian energy." Well, China will take Russian energy because they need cheap energy to keep their industrial engine running. Because remember what I said, you need finance, you need energy in order to get industrial production up and running primarily. China definitely has the people power to keep that stuff up and running. They have no shortage of people. So that's a net for them. However, they're running this zero COVID policy. So we have to think, if I give you biblical terms, you have to think towers of Babel. The Babel Tower in the biblical text talks about the group of people who wanted to build that tower to God. And God saw that was happening as these people were building this tower, and he set off a spell to change the language of all the people that were working this. Some say that's the genesis of languages in the world. Okay, I'm not pushing that point of view. We have to look at what's this the metaphor for. The metaphor of the Tower of Babel is that large hierarchical systems that edge towards, I wouldn't say that they edge towards tyrannical. If you think about the Tower of Babel, is that you're to build a tower to heaven. Basically, you're building a tower that's going to go so high it's going to exit the atmosphere of the earth. Is a gargantuan project. The thing that happens with gargantuan projects, if they're not run well and everybody's clear, understanding, all working together, is they fail catastrophically. Large complex systems get sucked in by entropy. So the ability of all the players to put their energy into that system, meaning like you and I showing up to do our work, requires a certain level of energy. And if the system is so bent on pressing you down, then you get things like I wouldn't say quiet quitting. That's just more of people extracting more value out of an organization. Then the organization is going to pay you and give you resources, primarily money. But if that is not, if there's no margin on that for the organization to make money, then why is the organization keeping you? That's silent quitting. But there's a different thing in China, is they call it the laying down. It's not necessarily quitting, it's that you just can't get ahead. Some, especially the younger generation, there's nothing they can do to get ahead. They can't get enough money to earn real estate because that's gone through the roof, even though part of the Chinese system is that's showing a lot of systemic weakness, especially in the financial industries, especially with, I think, Evergrande and needing to be bailed out, one of the big developers in China coming apart at the seams. Then you have, coming to the COVID lockdown, is you have people who are, there are pictures circulating where some of the people can't even open the doors to their home because they drilled in steel rebar, put that in so you can't open the door. It's all this, basically you've been shuttered in and kind of get food through a plate and other stuff through mail slots, and you have to wait for whoever the administrator person is. It's basically a prison at that point with the zero COVID policy. And what happened is there was a fire in, I believe, one of the apartment buildings, and yeah, people just burnt alive. And the Tower of Babel states that when you got a system like this, the Chinese system is a centrally controlled system. Centrally controlled systems are very open to factors of entropy pulling them apart. That's why you kind of need a decentralized system, grassroots, local level, where people can transact at that level, and some at high level, some governance that sets up constraints and just good ways of being. So true, if I go back to when I was growing up in Canada, and Canada really had a strong national identity. People around the world knew it. Canadians are polite, they're sincere. Oh, they fight well in battles. Look at Vimy Ridge in World War One. My great grandfather's interned there, and they fought really hard. And you see even the trucker protests, a bit of that spirit is still there of fighting hard for what you believe in. You don't fight on a grassroots level to enact change in the world, then the tyrannical leadership is going to take over, and they are going to screw up. They are going to hide their screw ups and shove it under the carpet however they can. You see all kinds of stuff, especially about the virus stuff that you can't quite talk about on these platforms, and how there's a lot of reversals and retractions that are happening. And in these big systems, even like China, where the people are not robots, there is a human spirit that remains in people, and you're seeing that humanity come to the forefront in China. What are they going to do? Arrest all of these people? Turn it into a prison planet there in China? Autocratic type regimes like that do not last. Yes, some people would say that, well, China has, the 1.5 billion or 1.3 to 1.5, many multiples of the United States. This is where I have to worry about the United States, that if they turn into prison planet and start to, you need everybody working together, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, both need each other. What we don't need are the nitwits on the very, very far sides. Kind of do without. Though, and that's something that even I have to be careful about, because sometimes through that conflict, better reasoning and rationale comes up in the court of public opinion, which is very important, where we can debate the radical elements that come up, gives us a way forward, or gives us a way to unify and saying, no, we really have to be based in what we're doing. And in China, that with the zero COVID policy, that is putting so much entropy into their system right now. But the globe needs China for how much that our supply chains rely on China. We take a look at chips. So let's close off on COVID in China. Is keep an eye on it, because this is a test of the new 5-year Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping's third kick at the can here. He's been reappointed as the chairman, and just to see how are they going to liberalize, or are they going to bring in the military, or are they going to borrow some horses from Canada to knock these people down. And this tells us that there's a significant amount of sentiment in China where people are just very upset. They're at that point. When you lose everything and have nothing left to lose, and then you keep losing it, then people lose it. They just there's nothing left except, well, you know, you'll see people say, well, they will probably claim that they have a right to protest, and we don't want violence. We don't, in this podcast here, we don't want people doing violent acts. You can only push people so far. And so we keep an eye on what's happening in China. The other part of why we need China is there's so much that in the global supply chain that is connected through China. Look at chips, for example, computer chips. So even automotive manufacturers are having problems. So think about when I have a commodity, and I consider computer chips a commodity. It's almost like I should say, we got energy, we got finance, we got computer chips, but um, it's actually quite important. So think of a car. Modern cars now have so many lines of code, far more than a lot of even military vehicles, space vehicles, far, far in excess of those. So the basic commercial car that's being brought out today had many, many lines of computer code, which means they have to run on all kinds of chips. There's no there's no central core unit in cars. It's more if you build a component and it has chips in it. So that component can be built by some group on the other side of the planet that can ship it to your manufacturing plant. You just install the thing. And even with some domestic producers now, there's so many chipped components because you can just, like, even I build drones and I can go to Alibaba or AliExpress and I can buy a set of power regulators or electronic energy conditioners and flight boards for very little money. And get a bunch of power boards for almost like 25 cents a power board. So it's ridiculously cheap. So because it's ridiculously cheap, the engineering practices, this is another thing that's important, is the engineering practices that people use now become a little lackluster. Back when I was growing up and doing computer science work, you had limited amounts of memory. You had limited amounts of registers to play with if you're doing assembly. I only had so much disk space to work with. So the code had to be really tight, had to be immaculately crafted in a way that can fit with the limitations of these components and systems. Then we got to a point where it just seems sky's the limit with elastic computing, cloud computing. We can put so much more, we can throw so much more stuff at these things. And maybe if performance is not good, then we'll go back and do some refactoring. But it almost seems like a computer scientist is more like kind of now the blue collar factory worker. They're just taking code from Stack Overflow, which is a place where you can look up code solutions, and just slapping it all together and shipping it. There's no art in that. And that means entropic factors can come in and start pulling at that. Especially now that we're seeing what the great resignation is now going to turn into the great, oh crap, I shouldn't have shot my mouth off. So this is where the artful folk that do their craft very well are going to succeed in this environment and succeed very well. The other folk that just kind of mail it in, don't take pride in their craft, are going to see some tight times coming up. And so with these automotive manufacturers, I could just, because stuff is so cheap, I could build without a lot of engineering considerations in what's going on. That's going to change because these components are no longer as cheap and readily available as they used to be. So now your engineers are going to have to think about that. All those bells and whistles in the car, maybe you don't have them anymore. until domestic production of these components increases. And well, it comes back to the greed during the World Trade Organization times back in late 90s, early 2000s, where companies just went chasing after trying to pull their bottom line down and outsourcing a lot of this because the nominal wage decreased by using offshore labor. Now that's going to hit an equalization point at some point. Perhaps that is now, or through the trials that are coming up in the next few years. We're going to see some changes. Okay, and just to end us off with something a little fun that's happening. Well, it looks like in the German Bundestag, temperatures got down to about a nice chilly 18.2 degrees centigrade. So think about working in your office and it's 18 degrees in your office Celsius. You're going to realize quickly that that's, if you were to keep it maybe 21, 22, that while you're sitting on a desk doing not much, that can get quite chilly. But 18, you're sitting at your desk in 18. So even I got a little blankie on right now because I keep the temperature a little low here. But just to think day in and day out doing that, yeah, people are getting more sick. They're getting colds. The body can't run at sitting. Think about these politicians sitting in those chairs. They got coats on now and scarves. So I guess maybe Madame Lagarde can start selling some of her scarf collection, or have the Lagarde collection and sell it to her colleagues in the EU as they freeze away. And more, they're freezing away because of their own decisions. So are you going to freeze to death for what you believe in? Well, it seems like at least they're virtue signaling that they're freezing within their own houses of parliament. So can't call them out on having it all nice, toasty, and warm in there. But it's going to get to a point where we're just going to get tired of this, and then things are going to have to change. So there's a silver lining. That silver lining doesn't come before hard work. And here's the miracle part: is those that think about the millennial or Gen Z or Z, if you're in Canada, coming up. For those of you who might be listening to this, put pride in your work. Go and look online for the life in Twitter. Here's a day in the life of Twitter. There's been some videos going around of some people saying, here's what I do at Twitter. And it's basically screwing around and hardly not doing any work at all. You have to think about providing value to the organizations in which you work, and like really seriously pushing and leaning in and trying to move the organization forward. Those people are going to succeed, and they're going to learn, and they will be the ones that will be in the C-suite in the decades to come, through hard work, perseverance, understanding these were not easy times, and they rose to the occasion of these not easy times. So to you folk out there who are pushing, working hard, congratulations, and I wish you all the success.